Welcome back, folks, to Unit 4, Lesson 4a. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Ottoman Empire. We'll get into that in a second. But just to let you know, we're going to be diverging from our focus the last few weeks on Europe and looking a little further east. And we're going to be focusing this particular unit on the Muslim empires of the middle of the last millennium, the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, what was going on within the Muslim world. A lot of things, and equally vibrant culture as what we were seeing in Europe at the time. So that's going to be really the focal point of both Lesson 4a and 4b. We're going to start in Lesson 4a, starting with a group that was focused, a group of people focused on what is today, present-day Turkey, and that is the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire, the word Ottoman you may recognize from a piece of furniture in your house, but it's actually more than that. It obviously has a connection, but the Ottoman Empire was a vast empire that stretched from Europe, Africa, and Asia, and at its height was almost able to take over Vienna, Austria. That's how far it went into Europe. So an incredibly powerful group of people, and a very, very different way of organizing an empire than we saw in Europe. So that's what we're going to be talking about for this particular lesson. On a kind of a non-related note, hopefully last unit you were able to get started on your project and you've read through what it is that your teacher is expecting of you, and if you have any questions, you're contacting your instructor for some assistance. We're going to be kind of breaking that up week by week. Every week from here on out, you're going to be having a task. If you follow through with the timeline that's been established, you should have no problem in finishing on time. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with today's material, the Ottoman Empire. What did we talk about last time? Well, as we like to review, let's go back and take a look at the fact that we talked about absolutism. We looked at absolutism as the idea that the monarch was given their power by God, the divine right of kings. The classic example of an absolute ruler was Louis XIV of France, but we saw absolute monarchs all the way through Europe. It was in Eastern Europe. A perfect example is Peter the Great of Russia. And we saw that these absolute monarchs like to show off. They really like to have these bold and incredibly ostentatious shows of wealth. And that new type of art and architecture was called the Baroque period. So that's a little bit about what we talked about last time. As we're now looking at the Ottoman Empire, just a little question to kind of pique your curiosity. You can think about it. You might have something like this that crops up in your questions this time. But the Ottoman Empire that we're going to learn about was actually known as the Gunpowder Empire, because what it did is it had a huge reliance on firearms technology, this brand new technology of the time in the 1500s and 1400s that was starting to come out of firearms. So we're moving away from spears and swords and things of that sort to actual firearms. And it made for a huge difference when the Ottomans went up against people that didn't have it. Obviously, they had a huge technological advantage. So the question for you is, how can changes in technology help or hinder, and that means kind of hurt, a nation? And are there any examples you can think of this? And it doesn't happen to be in the old days. It can be today. How did modern technology maybe right now, how is that helping or hurting a nation? So think about that a little bit. We'll come back to that as we discuss a little bit about the Ottomans. The reading for this part of the unit is going to be in Chapter 15. It's the Ottoman Empire, and it's pages 457 to 463. So about 6 pages there to read through that is going to be covered by the material we're going to talk about right here. As always, we've got some key terms, some critical terms that you need to know. One is Sultan, Gunpowder Empire, which we just talked about a little bit, the Grand Vizier, and Pasha. Okay, so see if you can find those in your reading. Jot down a little bit about what they mean, because you know they're going to show up on your question set. All right, without further ado, let's get started. What is the story with the Ottoman Empire? Who were they and where did they come from? Well, about 1200, which is in Europe still in the Dark Ages before we got to the Renaissance, a Turkish ruler named Osman set up a kingdom in what is today Turkey. So kind of outside of the sites of what was going on in Europe, but over there in Turkey in kind of what we consider today to be kind of the Middle East. And he started expanding his realm as his neighbors started declining in power. So as they went down, he would take over and kind of expand his empire. And this larger empire that he started to create in the 1200s was called the Ottoman Empire. And one of the things that he had for his control was he had the strategic openings called the Bosporus and the Dardanelles to the Black Sea. So the Black Sea is a huge connection, a port area with many of the cities of Russia. It flows into the Mediterranean Sea, which then, of course, goes into the North Atlantic. So Osman and the Ottoman Empire controls this really strategic trading point, and that is going to be critical, of course. Once we have an empire that has some control and is starting to look outward, we see what's called expansion. And the Ottoman Empire, just like Europe did in terms of overseas, starts to acquire those areas around it. And it really does move in concentric circles in all directions from Turkey. So it takes over smaller kingdoms in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in Europe. So it's really looking all the way around, and it's pulling these people in. Vast differences in religions, in ideology, but it's starting to pull these people in as it goes outward and outward. It really breaks up this old and kind of declining empire called the Byzantine Empire and takes over the capital city of Constantinople. Constantinople goes all the way back into the 400s and 500s. And it renames it in a Muslim word. Constantinople is a Christian city, and it renames it as Istanbul. And we still have Istanbul as the capital one of the major cities in Turkey even today. As we talked about before, they are experts in firearm technology. They get that from the East, from China, and use it incredibly well as they're taking over some of these other places. They even get so far as to be on the outskirts of Vienna, Austria. And Vienna, Austria is really kind of Central Europe, so they really are moving incredibly far, the Ottomans, to the west. Pretty incredible expansion at their height in the late 1600s. So what did they do? What happened in terms of their political system that made this so successful? Well, much like the absolute rulers in Europe, the Sultan, or the king of the Ottoman Empire, is also an absolute ruler. His word is absolutely the way it goes. There's no going around it. You don't have to have a vote. None of that stuff going on. He is an absolute ruler. All the lands in the entire kingdom are controlled by the Sultan. There are no, mid-level nobility. There's no dukes. There's no princes. None of that stuff going on. He controls everything. There's no private land ownership other than his. And because they don't have this mid-level nobility, there's no fighting back and forth to see who gets power like we saw that there was in Europe. He has the last word. And in order to make sure that the people that work for him, the bureaucrats is the name of individuals that work in the government, are always loyal, is he staffs the bureaucracy with slaves. So he takes on slaves, trains them to be good servants in the bureaucracy, and then they have the power to enforce his will. So he doesn't have to be worried about infighting or people kind of stabbing him in the back. The classic example of an Ottoman Sultan, the most powerful one, is Suleiman the Magnificent. Just sounds good, Suleiman the Magnificent. Sounds like a guy you don't mess with. And he uses local officials to govern captured regions. So he takes his slaves that are local to that area, understand the reality of that particular place, and uses them to kind of govern what's going on. So a pretty smart move politically for the Sultan to take. A little bit about the religion. Well, the Ottoman Empire was a Sunni Muslim religion. Okay, so Muslim, we understand what Muslim is, Islam, the Islamic religion. Sunni is one part of it. So if you were going to think about Christianity that has Catholics and Protestants, Muslims are also broken up into two groups called the Sunni and the Shia. Those are the two major groups of the Islamic religion. The Sultan is responsible for enforcing Islamic law. So it's the law of the Ottoman Empire is based on what's in the Quran, the official holy book of the Muslims. And the administrators, those who prepare the young elite in school, the educators essentially, are called the ulema. And they truly get people ready to take over for the bureaucracy that's focused on Muslim education. However, even though it's definitely a Muslim state, a Muslim country, the Ottomans are pretty tolerant of the non-Muslims in the empire. So if they take over an area that traditionally has been Christian, they don't try to change the people's religion. They figured that would be too much effort, and they didn't want to do that. So they are fairly tolerant. Another area where the Ottomans were definitely at kind of the cutting edge of the world was in their art. And they essentially took the best of all the different areas that they conquered in order to make their own type of art. So they fused the styles of Asian and Europeans in order to make this Ottoman art kind of special. The Sultan also used art, just like the kings and queens of Europe did, to show his power. So much like the Baroque style, Ottoman art showed the opulence and the power of the Sultan. And the mosques, or the churches of the Ottomans, were wide open and very opulent, much like the cathedrals of Europe. So there was no question that they were power centers. So that's a little bit about the Ottoman Empire. We'll learn more in our reading and our assignments, and we'll talk to you in Lesson 4b.